I showed up to my parents' lavish anniversary dinner, only to hear, "Sorry, you're not invited. Leave." Then they called security and said, "Get this beggar out." So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, and trip $62,000 worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 36 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. "I'm Michael Morgan, I'm 34 years old, and I was thrown out of my own parents' 40th anniversary party. A party I paid for, after they told security to, and I quote, 'Get this beggar out.' Before I tell you how that single moment of humiliation led to me quietly canceling $62,000 worth of their expenses and getting 36 missed calls in 20 minutes, let me know where you're all watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. It was a crisp Seattle evening, the kind where the autumn air feels clean and sharp in your lungs, and the city lights sparkle just a little brighter against the darkening sky. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the night. A foolish hope, in retrospect, but it was there, a stubborn little flicker in my chest. Tonight, I thought, they'll finally see me. Not the walking wallet, not the reliable backup plan, but me, their son. I was standing outside Ry4ns144, the kind of restaurant that doesn't have prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. The name itself felt like a cruel joke I was only just beginning to understand. In my hands, I held a heavy, dark wood box, its surface polished to a soft gleam under the streetlights. Inside were two matching Patek Philippe watches, a his and hers set, $5,000. A gift for my parents, Richard and Elizabeth Morgan, on their 40th wedding anniversary. I had spent the last month orchestrating this night like a military campaign. I dealt with the caterers, the florist, the string quartet. I'd put down the $18,000 non-refundable deposit myself, a fact I was reminded of every time my mother called with a new, small suggestion. It was supposed to be perfect, a testament to their 4 decades together, a testament, I hoped, to my value. I pushed open the heavy glass door, a blast of warm air washing over me. It smelled of truffle oil, seared scallops, and old money. The maitre d', a tall, impeccably dressed man named Jean-Pierre whom I'd spoken to a dozen times on the phone, gave me a polite but strained smile. His eyes flickered nervously past my shoulder. "Mr. Morgan," he said, his voice a low, discreet murmur. "Good evening, Jean-Pierre." I nodded, holding up the gift box. "Just wanted to drop this off before the guests arrive. Where are my parents?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on the figure marching towards us. My father. His face was a thundercloud, his jaw set like granite. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Jean-Pierre, as if the maitre d' had personally offended him. "Is there a problem?" My father's voice boomed, the sound cutting through the polite chatter of the lobby. He ignored me completely. I stepped forward, forcing a smile onto my face. "Dad, happy anniversary." He cut me off with a sharp, dismissive flick of his hand. His eyes, cold and gray as a winter sea, finally landed on me. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of annoyance, as if he'd found gum on his shoe. "What are you doing here?" The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. "What do you mean?" "It's your party. I have your gift." He let out a short, ugly laugh, a sound like tearing metal. He turned to the security guard standing by the door, a large man who suddenly looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Get this beggar out of here," my father said, his voice dripping with a contempt so pure it was almost impressive. "He is not welcome." The word beggar hit me like a physical blow. It sucked the air from my lungs. Me, the man who paid their mortgage, the man who funded his brother's string of failed businesses, the man who paid for his sister's extravagant wedding. A beggar. I looked from my father's stony face to Jean-Pierre's horrified one. I saw a few of the early arriving guests staring, their eyes wide with that unique blend of shock and morbid curiosity reserved for other people's disasters. The humiliation was a hot, painful flush that crawled up my neck. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. The flicker of hope in my chest had been extinguished so completely that there was nothing left but ash. I just gave a single, tight nod. I turned around and walked back out into the cold Seattle night, the heavy gift box still in my hands. As the door swung shut behind me, I heard my father's voice again, loud, clear, and utterly triumphant. Finally, now we can begin. The walk back to my car was a blur. I got home to my sleek, empty apartment overlooking Lake Union. It was the kind of place that screamed success, filled with minimalist furniture and expensive art. But tonight, it felt like a tomb. I walked over to my desk, sat down, and turned on my computer. I opened a single file, a spreadsheet I had started creating years ago as a grim, private joke. It was named simply Family Support Tracking. It was already filled with lines of dates, descriptions, and dollar amounts. I scrolled to the bottom and added a new entry, October 12th. Ry4ns144 40th anniversary party deposit. $18,000. Staring at the screen, at the cold, hard numbers that represented a decade of my life, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was a terrifying, profound quiet. The quiet of an engine that has finally, after years of running on fumes and prayers, seized up completely. That quiet in my apartment was heavy. It was a silence that had weight and texture, filled with the ghosts of 1,000 other moments, 1,000 other cuts, a lifetime of feeling like I was on the outside of my own family, looking in through a window I was expected to pay for. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the foundation that night was built on. It wasn't just about one party. It was about everything that came before, every brick of disrespect laid down over 34 years. My mind drifted back to a Christmas when I was about 10. It was a whirlwind of torn wrapping paper and squeals of delight. My older sister, Heather, the golden child, got a brand new, shimmering purple bike. My younger brother, Eric, the baby of the family, got the latest Nintendo console. They were flashy, expensive gifts that were paraded around for my parents to admire. "Oh, Richard, look!" my mother had cooed, beaming at Heather. "Isn't she just a picture?" "That's my girl," my father had said, ruffling Heather's hair. I had spent a whole month in my room, secretly sanding, staining, and carving a small wooden box for my dad. It wasn't much, but I'd poured my heart into every detail, even saving up my allowance to buy a small, ornate brass latch for it. On Christmas morning, after the chaos of the big gifts died down, I shyly handed him my small, carefully wrapped present. He took it, gave it a little shake, and tore the paper off with an indifferent air. He looked at the box for a second, turning it over in his hands. "Oh, that's nice, Michael," he said, his eyes already drifting back to the new set of Callaway golf clubs my mom had given him. "Very rustic." He placed my box on the end table, next to a pile of discarded wrapping paper. It was never mentioned again. I found it a few months later in the garage, half buried under a pile of old newspapers, already collecting dust. That was the day I learned a hard lesson, a lesson that would define the next 2 decades of my life. My effort had no value. Only things that came with a price tag did. As I grew up, that lesson was reinforced again and again. I wasn't naturally brilliant like Heather, who seemed to coast through school on a cloud of charm and effortless A's. I wasn't the coddled baby like Eric, whose every mistake was met with a sigh and a fresh check. I was the worker, the reliable one, the one who had to earn his place at the table. So I worked my tail off. I got a scholarship to the University of Washington, studied finance, and clawed my way into a competitive firm downtown. By 30, I was a successful financial advisor, specializing in the volatile but lucrative world of tech investments. I was making more money than I ever thought possible. And that's when the calls started. My success wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource to be tapped. It began with the mortgage on their sprawling suburban home. "Michael, sweetheart," my mom would say, her voice like warm honey over the phone. "Your father and I are just in a bit of a tight spot this month. The property taxes went up again, you know how it is." I knew it wasn't a tight spot. It was a lifestyle they couldn't afford, propped up by credit cards and my father's dwindling commissions. But I said yes. And this month turned into every month. an unspoken line item in my budget. Then came Eric, my perpetually aspiring entrepreneur brother. His ideas were always grand, his business plans always written on napkins. First, it was the gourmet food truck specializing in fusion tacos. I gave him $50,000 as a loan he never intended to repay. It went bankrupt in 6 months after he spent most of the capital on a custom paint job. Then it was a revolutionary new app for rating coffee shops. Another $30,000. It never even launched. The last one was an artisanal coffee shop in Fremont. This time I tried to intervene. I visited the half-finished location. He'd spent a fortune on reclaimed wood and vintage Edison bulbs, but hadn't even secured a reliable coffee bean supplier. "Eric, look," I'd said gently, holding up his messy business plan. "Your overhead is huge before you've even sold a single cup of coffee. Your margins here are razor thin. Maybe you should scale back, start smaller." He'd snatched the papers back, his face flushing with resentment. "Don't bring your boring work stuff into this, Mike. This is about passion, about a vibe. You wouldn't get it." His eyes narrowed. "Just tell me if you're in or not." The unspoken threat was clear. If you're not in, you're not part of the family. So I was in, for another $75,000. Closed its doors in less than a year. Each time I wasn't just writing a check. I was buying my ticket to Thanksgiving dinner. I was paying the toll to be included in the family photo. And Heather was the master of subtle exploitation. She never asked for a handout directly. She was too polished for that. She just created situations where my paying for things was the only logical solution. Her wedding was her masterpiece. It was a lavish affair at a historic hotel overlooking the Sound. The budget kept ballooning like a hot air balloon with a hole in it. "Oh, Michael," she'd sighed over brunch one day, looking perfect and concerned in her cashmere sweater. "Mom and Dad are so stressed about the cost of the string quartet. Dad's been having chest pains just thinking about it. I wish there was some way to help them." The implication was clear. I paid for the quartet, and the ice sculpture of 2 swans, and the open bar that my cousins took full advantage of. Over $40,000 in total. At the wedding, during the father-daughter dance, I watched my dad whisper in her ear, and she laughed, her face glowing with pure, uncomplicated happiness. I felt a familiar pang, the ghost of a 10-year-old boy with a dusty wooden box. The call about the 40th anniversary party was the culmination of it all. It was my mother, Elizabeth, at her manipulative best. "Michael, sweetheart, your father would never admit it, but he really wants to do something special for our 40th, she began. "We were thinking of Lame One. It's his favorite. Heather has been such a wonderful help. You know, she's helping me with the guest list. It's just, the deposit is a little steep." "How steep?" I asked, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. $18,000, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as if she were sharing a secret, not making a demand. But it would mean the world to him, to us. She knew exactly which buttons to push. The dangling carrot of my father's approval. The subtle jab comparing me to Heather's helpfulness. I caved as I always did. I transferred the money that same day. And all I got for it was a public execution of my dignity. Staring at my dark apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of indifferent stars. All these memories swirled around me, forming a suffocating vortex of resentment and pain. I felt a tremor in my hands. The silence in the room was no longer quiet. It was screaming. It was the collective scream of every ignored gift, every wasted dollar, every moment I had swallowed my pride and bitten my tongue for a scrap of affection. I was drowning in it. The fear, cold and slick, that they were right. That without my checkbook, I was a beggar. That I was nothing. The thought was so paralyzing I could barely breathe. A wave of guilt, insidious and familiar, washed over me. They're my family. I should forgive them. Maybe Dad was just stressed. Maybe I misunderstood. The excuses, the same ones I'd been making for them my whole life, started to bubble up, a poison I had willingly been drinking for years. My finger hovered over the delete button on my keyboard. I could just erase the spreadsheet. Erase the evidence of my own foolishness. I could call tomorrow, apologize for whatever I did wrong, and things would go back to normal. A painful, expensive, soul-crushing normal. But then, an image flashed in my mind, as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. My father's face, twisted in disgust. His lips forming that one single word, beggar. That was it. The final crack in the dam. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't deleting the spreadsheet. I was going to finish it. I picked up my phone, my hand surprisingly steady. I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the name Jordan, my best friend since college. The one person who had seen glimpses of this madness for years, who always said, "Dude, that's not normal." He answered on the second ring. "Hey man, how was the big party? Did your dad actually crack a smile?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding since I walked out of that restaurant. Came out as a hollow, broken sound. "They threw me out, Jordan." There was a pause on the other end. It wasn't a pause of disbelief. It was a pause of weary, frustrated resignation. "What did they do now, Mike?" I told him everything. The gift, the words, the security guard. I didn't cry. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as if I were reciting a grocery list. When I was done, the silence stretched for a moment. "I'm about to do something crazy," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I think I'm about to burn it all down. I need a friend." "I'm on my way," Jordan said, without a moment's hesitation. There was a new energy in his voice, a kind of fierce satisfaction. "Don't do anything until I get there. And Mike, it's about damn time." Jordan arrived 20 minutes later with a grimly determined look on his face and a six-pack of craft IPA under his arm. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances like, "I'm sure they didn't mean it." He knew they meant it. He just sat on my expensive leather couch, cracked open 2 bottles, handed one to me and said, "All right, show me the damage. Show me everything." The next morning, I walked into my office an hour early. My assistant, Chloe, was already at her desk, bathed in the cool glow of her monitor. She's a no-nonsense woman in her late 20s with an almost supernatural level of efficiency. She can organize a hostile takeover and book a dental appointment with the same calm, focused energy. She looked up as I entered, her sharp eyes taking in my rumpled suit and the dark circles under my eyes. "You look like you wrestled a bear and lost," she stated, not unkindly. "Coffee? Coffee. Black," I said. "And I need to book the main conference room for the next few hours. It's a personal matter." An hour later, the 3 of us were huddled in my glass-walled conference room overlooking the bustling streets of downtown Seattle. Felt like a war room. Jordan was there for moral support, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. Chloe was there for execution, her fingers poised over her laptop keyboard. I had the family support spreadsheet projected onto the large screen at the end of the room. The numbers glowed in the dim light, a monument to my own folly. The total at the bottom was stark and obscene, $327,845. And that was just what I could document from bank records over the last 10 years. Jordan let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Mike, that's a house. You bought them a house they don't even know they own." "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath that did little to calm the tremor in my hands. "This is the plan. We are systematically cutting off every single financial tie I have with my family. Effective immediately. Chloe, I need you to be my proxy on these calls. I can't talk to them. I want it done cleanly, professionally, and without emotion." Chloe's eyes scanned the list on the screen, her expression unreadable. Then, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a chess player who sees a checkmate in 5 moves. "With pleasure," she said, pulling her laptop closer. "Where do we start?" "We start with the party," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. "The scene of the crime." Chloe was a marvel of destructive efficiency. She got Jean-Pierre from Lame One on the phone. Her tone was polite but firm, the verbal equivalent of a velvet-wrapped brick. Yes, Mr. Jean-Pierre. This is Chloe, calling from Michael Morgan's office. Yes, he's fine, thank you for asking. Regarding the Morgan anniversary party, due to unforeseen circumstances, Mr. Morgan will be withdrawing his financial sponsorship for the remainder of the event. Yes, I understand the deposit is non-refundable. Mr. Morgan is aware of that. He has instructed me to inform you that you are to redirect that entire $18,000 deposit as an anonymous donation to Seattle Children's Hospital. Yes, anonymous. He's quite insistent. Thank you for your understanding. As she spoke, I felt a knot in my stomach that had been there for years begin to loosen. There was a small cancellation fee for the string quartet and the florist, a few $100s. A price I was more than willing to pay for my freedom. Next was the Alaskan cruise I had booked for their real anniversary gift. A 7-day trip in a suite with a private balcony. Chloe was ruthless. She navigated the cruise line's automated phone tree with the skill of a fighter pilot, got a real human on the line, and canceled it, redirecting the substantial travel credit to my own name. Perhaps you'll take a trip yourself, she said to me with a small shrug. Then came the Disney trip for Heather and her family. I had booked them a week-long vacation, complete with park hopper passes and a stay at the luxurious Grand Floridian. When Chloe called the travel agency, the agent on the other end sounded cheerful. Oh yes, the Morgan party, the agent chirped. I was just speaking with Mrs. Morgan yesterday. Chloe paused. You were? Yes. She was so excited. She wanted to upgrade the whole family to the presidential suite and add the deluxe dining plan. A wonderful surprise for her parents. She told me to just go ahead and charge it to the credit card on file, Mr. Michael Morgan's card. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. Of course, she did. The entitlement was so deeply ingrained she didn't even think to ask. She just assumed the bank of Michael was bottomless and always open for withdrawals. Cancel it all, Chloe, I said, my voice tight. Every last bit of it. Yes, Chloe said into the phone, her voice turning to ice. We will be canceling the entire reservation. And please make a note on the account that no further charges are to be authorized by anyone other than Mr. Morgan himself. We went down the list like assassins crossing names off a hit list. A business loan for Eric's next guaranteed-to-fail venture. Some nonsense about artisanal, gluten-free dog treats was rescinded. The renewal for my parents' prestigious country club membership, which I paid for every year, was canceled. Finally, the automated monthly payment for their mortgage. With a few clicks in my online banking portal, Chloe set an end date. The next payment would be their last. After that, the bank would be talking to them, not me. The whole process took less than 2 hours. When it was done, the conference room was silent. Over $62,000 in current and future commitments had been wiped clean. It's done, Chloe said, closing her laptop with a soft, final click. Thank you, Chloe, I said, the words feeling inadequate. You have no idea what this means. I think I have some idea, she replied, giving me a rare, genuine smile. I'll handle the paperwork and email you the confirmations. For the first few hours, there was nothing. A blissful, terrifying silence. I tried to work, but my eyes kept drifting to my phone, my stomach churning in anticipation of the inevitable explosion. It started around 3 p.m. A single text from Heather, deceptively casual. Hey, Mike, weird question, but the Disney travel agent just called me in a panic saying the trip was canceled? Is something wrong with your card? Let me know. XO. I stared at the message, a cold, humorless smile on my face. The XO was a particularly nice touch. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, a text from Eric. This one was less subtle. What the hell are you doing? The bank just called me about the business loan. They said you pulled it. This was my big shot. Call me now. I ignored it. Then the floodgates opened. My phone began to vibrate and light up. A non-stop barrage of calls and texts. It was a digital assault. My mother, my father, Eric, Heather. They came one after another, their digital voices a cacophony of confusion, then anger, then outright panic. I just watched, a detached observer to my family's collective meltdown. At 5 p.m., I silenced my phone and put it in a desk drawer. But the pressure campaign was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to a new wave of messages, each one a different flavor of manipulation. From my mother, a long, tearful voicemail, her voice cracking with practiced despair. "Michael, I don't know what we did to make you so angry, but you are breaking my heart. Your father is a mess. He won't even come out of his study. Please, sweetheart, just call me. Whatever it is, we can fix it. We love you." From my father, a cold, threatening text that was much closer to his true feelings. "You have 24 hours to fix this mess, or you will regret it. This is not a game." I saved them all. Every last word. The final act came that evening. I was sitting on my couch with Jordan, watching a basketball game, trying to pretend things were normal. Then, the intercom buzzed, a harsh, jarring sound. It was the front desk. "Mr. Morgan, there are, four people here to see you. A Richard, Elizabeth, Heather, and Eric Morgan. They say it's a family emergency." The doorman sounded stressed. Jordan looked at me, his eyebrows raised. "Showtime," he muttered. "Send them up," I said into the intercom, my voice surprisingly steady. A few minutes later, there was a frantic, insistent pounding on my door. I took a deep breath, walked over, and opened it. My entire family was standing in the hallway, their faces a mixture of fury and panic. They looked like a pack of wolves who had just found their favorite prey wasn't just missing, but had set the forest on fire. "Michael, thank God," my mother began, trying to push past me into the apartment. "You need to call the bank. Call the travel agent. You need to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked calmly, not moving, my body blocking the doorway. "Don't play dumb," Eric snarled, his face red and blotchy. "You know what you did. You're trying to ruin us. You're trying to ruin my life." My father stepped forward, pushing his way to the front. He jabbed a finger in my face, his eyes boring into mine. "This little tantrum of yours is over. Do you hear me? It's over. Now you are going to get on the phone and undo every bit of this damage." I just looked at them one by one. The four people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just empty. The emotional well had finally run dry. I stepped back into my apartment, picked up my tablet from the coffee table, and turned it towards them. On the screen was the spreadsheet, every line item, every dollar, glowing like an indictment in the dim light of the hallway. I let them look at it for a full minute. I watched their eyes scan the numbers. I watched the anger in their faces curdle into stunned disbelief. I saw Eric's jaw go slack. I saw Heather's perfect composure crack. I saw the blood drain from my father's face. Then I looked my father in the eye and said the 5 words that would change everything. "The bank is closed." And I shut the door in their faces. After I closed the door, a profound, eerie silence fell over the apartment. The furious pounding I expected never came. It was as if the sight of that spreadsheet, the cold, hard, undeniable proof of their decade-long financial drain, had been a bucket of ice water that extinguished their rage, leaving only speechless shock. From the hallway, I heard a muffled sob, my mother's, and then the sound of retreating footsteps. Jordan let out a long, low whistle. "Well," he said, taking a slow sip of his beer, "I think that went better than expected. No property damage." I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly feeling like they were made of jelly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I had stood up to them, finally. But one thing my mother had screamed at me during their tirade at my door kept replaying in my mind. A poisonous dart. In a moment of pure, venomous rage, after seeing the numbers on the tablet, she had spat, "You're ungrateful. You have no idea what real loyalty is. Even your grandmother knew you'd be nothing without us to guide you." The words were meant to be a final, twisting knife. A way to tell me that even the one person in the family I'd always felt a deep, quiet connection with, my grandmother Eleanor, who had passed away 5 years ago, had secretly seen me as a failure in waiting. It was a cruel, desperate lie. I knew it was, but it still stung. It was designed to hit me where I was most vulnerable. My fear of being inherently worthless. More than that, it planted a seed. My grandmother had always been different. She was quiet, observant, and she used to look at me with a sad, knowing expression in her eyes, especially when my parents were gushing over Heather's latest achievement or writing another check to bail out Eric. She would give my hand a little squeeze, a silent message I never fully understood until now. What had she really thought? The next day, driven by a need I couldn't quite articulate, I found myself scrolling through the old contacts on my phone. My parents, in their quest to create a perfect echo chamber, had systematically pushed away any family members who didn't play along with their narrative. That included my mother's own sister, my Aunt Catherine. They'd had a major falling out years ago over something to do with my grandparents' will, an event my mother always described vaguely as Catherine being greedy. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but her number was still there, a ghost in my phone. My finger hovered over the call button. This was a door I hadn't opened in a long time. It felt dangerous, like I was betraying my family all over again, but this time on a deeper level. But my mother's lie had burrowed into my mind, and I needed to uproot it. I needed the truth. I pressed the button. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice cautious, unfamiliar. "Hello, Aunt Catherine," I said, my own voice sounding strange and young to my ears. It's Michael, your nephew, Michael Morgan." There was a long, stunned pause on the other end. I could hear a faint sound, like a television in the background. "Michael," she finally said, her voice softening with a wave of surprise and warmth that I wasn't expecting. "My goodness, it's been such a long time. Is everything all right?" The simple, genuine concern in her voice almost broke me. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "It's a long story, but I need to ask you something. About Grandma Eleanor." We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a small, quiet coffee shop in Ballard, a neutral territory far from our respective neighborhoods. I saw her before she saw me. She looked older, of course, with fine lines around her kind, intelligent eyes. My grandmother's eyes. With her was my cousin, Rebecca, her daughter, who I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Rebecca gave me a warm, welcoming smile that held no judgment, no awkwardness. Felt easy, normal. After we ordered our coffees and settled into a booth, I took a deep breath and told them. Not everything, but enough. I told them about the years of financial support, the constant pressure, and the final, ugly scene at the anniversary party. My voice was low and steady as I recounted what my mother had said about my grandmother. Aunt Catherine listened patiently, her hands wrapped around her warm mug, her expression shifting from sadness to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "Oh, Michael," she sighed, her voice laced with a familiar weariness. "Your mother. She has a master's degree in rewriting history. Your grandmother saw everything. She wasn't blind. She saw their greed. She saw how they treated you versus Heather and Eric. It broke her heart." Rebecca reached across the table and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was warm and grounding. "She was so proud of you, Michael," she said earnestly. "She used to tell us all the time. 'That boy,' she'd say. 'He's building his whole life on his own, with no help from anyone. He's the one with real strength.'" Then, Aunt Catherine looked me straight in the eye, her gaze intense. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice dropping lower. "The real reason your parents and I had our falling out was because of your grandmother's will. She left the bulk of the estate to be divided equally, which is what your parents always focus on. But she did something else. Something in secret." She paused, and I leaned in, my heart starting to pound. "She set up a separate trust fund, just for you." I stared at her, the words not making sense. "A what?" "A trust fund," she repeated, her voice firm. "She put $175,000 in it. It was to be held by a third-party trustee until you turned 35, or until a time when she believed you would be strong enough to stand on your own, free from their influence. She wrote a letter to the trustee explaining her reasoning. She knew Michael. She knew this day would come, in one form or another. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. $175,000. It was a staggering amount, but it wasn't the money that hit me. It was the validation, the love, the foresight, the undeniable, concrete proof that I hadn't been crazy. Someone had seen me. Someone had believed in me all along. It was a shield, forged years ago by my grandmother's quiet love, and it was being handed to me right when I needed it most. Aunt Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a worn, cream-colored envelope. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's elegant, looping script. She left this for you, too. The lawyer gave it to me for safekeeping. I took the letter, my hands trembling. It felt heavier than any amount of money. It was a lifeline to a past I thought I'd lost. A confirmation of a love I was told I didn't deserve. I didn't open it. Not yet. It was too much, too precious. They don't know about it, Catherine continued. It was structured through a different lawyer, an old friend of your grandmother's. She wanted to make sure they could never touch it or use it as leverage against you. I sat there, speechless, the letter clutched in my hand. It wasn't a weapon to be used against them. It was armor for me. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had been loved, truly and unconditionally, by the matriarch of the family. My mother's cruelest lie had inadvertently led me to the most profound and healing truth. We talked for another hour, filling in the gaps of the lost years. Felt easy, like coming home to a place I'd never known. As we were getting ready to leave, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. They found out about your dinner with Mr. Chun tomorrow night. A source at his company mentioned it to Heather's husband during a conference call. My blood ran cold. Mr. Chun was my biggest client, a titan in the tech industry. I was on the verge of closing a massive deal with him, the biggest of my career. That dinner was the final celebratory step, and my family knew about it. The battle wasn't over. They were just changing the battlefield from my apartment to my career. The private dining room at Canlis was the definition of understated power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of Lake Union and the twinkling lights of the city. The air was filled with the low hum of important conversations from other rooms and the distant, gentle clinking of expensive silverware. This dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a stage. And on that stage tonight was the most important performance of my career. Across the polished mahogany table from me sat Mr. Chun. He was a man in his late 60s, with a quiet, almost placid demeanor that belied a razor-sharp mind. He had built his software empire from nothing, and he didn't suffer fools gladly. For 6 months, I had worked tirelessly to earn his trust, meticulously managing a small portion of his portfolio and proving my worth through diligence and results, not flashy promises. Tonight was about finalizing a deal that would see me managing a significant portion of his entire corporate fund. It was a life-changing, career-defining opportunity. Your performance this year has been impressive, Michael, Mr. Chun said, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. His voice was soft, but carried immense weight. You are diligent. You do not chase trends. You build value. It is a rare quality in a young man. Thank you, sir, I said, my heart pounding a steady, anxious rhythm against my ribs. I believe in building things that last. As do I, he said with a small nod. As do I. We were just about to move on to the final details of the contract, which lay in a leather-bound folder on the table between us, when the door to our private room opened without a knock. It wasn't the waiter. It was my father, flanked by my mother and Heather, who hovered behind him like malevolent guardian angels. They weren't screaming or shouting. They were worse. They had donned costumes of loving concern. Their faces were etched with practiced worry. My father was wearing his most somber navy suit, the one he wore to funerals. My mother had a silk tissue clutched in her hand, ready for deployment. Heather looked like she was on the verge of tears, her lower lip trembling just so. It was a perfectly choreographed performance. Mr. Chun looked up, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. His peaceful dinner had been invaded. My father stepped forward, his voice filled with a fake, paternal gravity that made my skin crawl. Mr. Chun? I am so terribly sorry to interrupt. I'm Richard Morgan, Michael's father. This is his mother, Elizabeth, and his sister, Heather. He gestured for them to enter, and they arranged themselves in a tableau of loving, reluctant intervention. We are just so worried about Michael, my father continued, his eyes fixed on my client, completely ignoring me. He's been going through a very difficult time, not himself, making some very rash, impulsive decisions that have us deeply concerned for his well-being. My mother dabbed at her dry eyes with the tissue. He's shut us out completely, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. We're his family. We only want what's best for him. We just wanted to make sure he was all right, that he wasn't getting in over his head. Heather chimed in, her voice soft and full of feigned sympathy. He's under so much pressure at work. We're afraid he's not thinking clearly. We'd never forgive ourselves if something happened and we hadn't tried to help. It was brilliant, a masterful, insidious attack. They weren't calling me a bad son. They were calling me an unstable professional. A bad investment. They were poisoning the well, planting a seed of doubt in the mind of my most important client. They were trying to destroy my career right in front of my eyes, all under the guise of loving concern. It was the nuclear option. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, so intense it made my vision swim for a second. But I pushed it down, deep down. I could see the calculation in their eyes. They expected me to lose my temper, to start yelling, to have a meltdown. They wanted me to prove their point for them, to show Mr. Chun that I was indeed unstable. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. The glass was cool and heavy in my hand. I placed it down gently on the white linen tablecloth, making no sound. I looked at Mr. Chun, whose face had become an unreadable mask of polite neutrality. And then I turned my full attention to my family. When I spoke, my voice was calm, devoid of anger. It was the voice of a man stating facts in a boardroom. Unstable, I began, my eyes locking with my father's. You think I'm unstable? I let the question hang in the air, the silence stretching. Let me see if I understand this correctly, I continued, my voice level and measured. My instability. Did it start when I stopped paying your mortgage on the house you can't afford? Or was it perhaps when I canceled the first-class, week-long Disney vacation for Heather's family? I imagine it must have been particularly concerning for you when I rescinded the $75,000 business loan for Eric's third failed startup. Their faces began to change. The practiced looks of concern faltered, replaced by flickers of genuine shock. This was not the script they had rehearsed. They had expected tears or rage, not this calm, surgical dissection. You're worried I'm not thinking clearly? I went on, shifting my gaze to my mother. You must have been worried about my clarity of thought when you stood at the door of a restaurant I paid for and instructed the staff to get this beggar out. Or perhaps your deep concern for my mental state peaked just last night, when you lied to my face and told me my own grandmother thought I was a failure. My mother's face went pale, then mottled with red. The tissue in her hand crumpled. I saved the final blow for my father. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity, none of its sharp, cutting edge. But you're right about one thing. I did recently make a discovery that has made me question my own judgment. For years, I questioned it. I questioned why I spent a decade propping up a family that saw me as nothing more than an ATM. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the silent room. And then I discovered why my grandmother, Eleanor, set up a secret trust fund for me. A trust fund for $175,000. I watched the color drain completely from my father's face. His mouth opened slightly. The name Eleanor and the specific dollar amount hit him like a physical blow. He looked utterly poleaxed. A trust fund, I finished, my voice now cold as ice, that she specifically created, with a lawyer you don't know, to protect me from the one thing she truly feared would ruin my life. Your greed. Silence. A thick, suffocating, absolute silence filled the room. The masks had not just slipped. They had shattered into a million pieces on the expensive carpet. Their ugly, desperate scheme was laid bare under the polite, elegant lighting of the expensive restaurant. Mr. Chun, who had been watching this entire exchange like a hawk watching a battle between a snake and a mongoose, slowly placed his linen napkin on the table. He looked at my father, his eyes narrowed to angry slits. "I think," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the immense authority of a man who builds and destroys companies before breakfast, "that you should leave now. I am in the middle of a business dinner with a man I trust completely, and you are trespassing." My father opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. There were no more lies to tell, no more performances to give. They had lost. Not just the argument, but the war. They had fired their most powerful shot, and it had blown up in their faces, taking their dignity with it. Without another word, the three of them turned and walked out of the room. Their exit wasn't angry or defiant. It was the slow, shuffling walk of utter and absolute defeat. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone with my client in the echoing, victorious silence. In the moments after the door closed, the silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the frantic hammering of my heart against my ribs. The view of the city lights outside seemed impossibly bright, almost surreal. I had done it. I had faced them on their chosen battlefield, a place where my reputation and livelihood were on the line. I hadn't just defended myself. I had used the truth as a weapon, and I had won. I turned to Mr. Chun, my face flushed, the adrenaline making me feel shaky. The words tumbled out of me, a torrent of apology. "Mr. Chun, I am so incredibly sorry. I can't apologize enough for what just happened. That was unprofessional and completely unacceptable. It was a private family matter that should never have entered this room. I understand if this changes things regarding our partnership. I was prepared for the deal to be dead. I had just exposed my messy, toxic family drama to a man who valued discretion and stability above all else. In his world, drama was a liability. I had braced myself for his polite dismissal, a quiet, "perhaps we should reconsider." He simply looked at me for a long moment, his expression thoughtful, his fingers steepled in front of him. Then, he shook his head slowly, a gesture that spoke volumes before he even opened his mouth. "Michael," he said, his voice calm and steady, "you have nothing to apologize for." He picked up his wine glass. "Tonight, I did not see a man with a messy family. We all have those to some degree. I saw a man who was the subject of a calculated, vicious attack on his professional character. An ambush, and I saw that man handle it with a level of dignity, poise, and truth that I have rarely witnessed in men twice your age." He gestured towards the door with his glass, a flicker of distaste in his eyes. "People like that," he said, "they exist in all walks of life. They are parasites. They attach themselves to those with strength and try to drain it for themselves. The true test of a person's character is not whether they encounter such people, but how they deal with them when they do." He looked me directly in the eye, and for the first time that evening, I saw a genuine, warm smile on his face. It transformed his severe features, making him look less like a CEO and more like a mentor. "You did not build your career on my money, Michael. You built it on your integrity. Tonight, you proved that integrity is not for sale at any price." He reached for the contract folder that was sitting on the table between us. He opened it, took out a handsome fountain pen from his breast pocket, and signed his name on the final page with a firm, decisive stroke. "The contract is signed," he said, sliding it across the table to me. "I believe in building things that last, and I believe you are a man who understands exactly what that means. Now," he added, his smile widening, "let's order dessert. I believe we have a new partnership to celebrate." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. It wasn't just about the money or the deal, as life-changing as those were. It was about his words. "I believe in you." It was the validation I had been chasing my entire life, and it hadn't come from my family, bought and paid for with my own money. It had come from a near stranger who saw my worth, not my wallet. It was real. A week later, I agreed to one final meeting with my parents. It was my decision on my terms. Not at my home and not at theirs. We met at a sterile, neutral coffee shop in a part of town neither of us frequented. It was a place with no memories and no emotional attachments. They looked smaller, diminished. The anger and entitlement had been replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. They were no longer on the attack. They were wounded, confused animals. They tried, half-heartedly, to apologize, but their words were hollow, filled with justifications and blame-shifting. "We were just worried about you, Michael. You were being so secretive. We never meant for it to go that far. Your father was just upset." I listened, but I didn't engage. I didn't argue. There was no point. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry for how it had turned out for them. When they were finished, sputtering into silence, I laid out my terms. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. "Our financial relationship is over," I said, my voice even and clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Permanently. I will not be your bank, your safety net, or your emergency fund any longer. Your financial choices, your mortgage, your lifestyle, they are now your own." I paused, letting that sink in. I watched my mother's face crumple, and my father stare intensely into his coffee cup, unable to meet my eyes. "If you ever want to have a real relationship with me," I continued, "a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine love, not on what I can do for you, the door is open. But it is a door you will have to walk through on your own. You will have to do the work. The choice is yours." My mother started to cry, but they were tears of self-pity, not remorse. Tears for the loss of her comfortable life, not for the loss of her son's love. I stood up. "I have to go," I said, as I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright, clear afternoon sun. I felt a profound sense of release, as if a massive, invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It was a weight I had been carrying for so long, I hadn't even realized its full heft. The crushing burden of their expectations, their disappointments, their constant, unspoken demands, was finally gone. I hadn't just closed the bank. I had foreclosed on the entire emotional debt they held over me. I was finally, truly free. The 6 months that followed were like learning to breathe again after being underwater for a very long time. At first, the silence from my family was unnerving, a void where there used to be constant, low-grade static of demands and manipulations. I kept expecting a call, another manipulative text, another staged confrontation. But nothing came. It seemed that, without the leverage of money, they had nothing to say to me. The silence was, in its own way, the most honest communication we'd ever had in our entire lives. My business, bolstered by the massive contract with Mr. Chun, flourished. My reputation for integrity and calm under pressure had, ironically, been cemented by my family's very public attack. Word travels fast in the financial world, and the story, in its vaguest, most professional form, had painted me as a man of unshakable character. But the biggest change wasn't in my bank account. It was in me. On the advice of Jordan, who said, "Dude, you've been through a war, you need to talk to some other veterans," I had sought out a support group. It was for people who had experienced financial and emotional abuse from their families. Walking into that first meeting, in the basement of a community center, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Felt like an admission of failure. The room was filled with strangers from all walks of life. A teacher, a plumber, a successful lawyer. But as they began to speak, I heard echoes of my own story in theirs. A woman in her 50s talked about her golden child brother, whose debts she was still paying off. A young man talked about the constant emergency loans for his parents that were never paid back. Another woman spoke about the guilt-tripping phone calls, the way love was always transactional. I heard the phrase human ATM, and a jolt went through me. For the first time in my life, I was in a room with people who just got it. I didn't have to explain or justify my feelings. They understood the unique pain and confusion that comes from being hurt by the very people who are supposed to protect you. I started to share my own story, tentatively at first, my voice shaky. But the nods of understanding, the murmurs of "yep," been there, gave me strength. I found that turning my pain into a cautionary tale for others was incredibly healing. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and my scars could be a map for someone else trying to find their way out of the darkness. My world, which had once been so small and claustrophobically centered around my toxic family, began to expand. I reconnected properly with Aunt Catherine and Rebecca. They became a regular, joyful part of my life. We had Sunday brunches that were filled with easy laughter, not passive-aggressive comments. We celebrated birthdays with simple, thoughtful gifts, not extravagant displays of wealth. It was a simple, easy kind of love, the kind I had always craved and thought I didn't deserve. That November, I decided to host my first Friendsgiving. My apartment, which had once felt like a sterile showcase of my success, a place to impress people, was now filled with genuine warmth and the delicious smell of roasting turkey. The guest list was a testament to my new life. Jordan and Chloe were there, of course, no longer just a friend and an employee, but my trusted inner circle. Aunt Catherine brought her famous sweet potato casserole, and Rebecca helped me figure out how to cook a turkey without setting off the smoke alarm. The other chairs were filled by my new friends from the support group. We were a motley crew, a collection of people who had been broken by our pasts and were now helping each other piece ourselves back together. A chosen family. As I stood at the head of the table, looking at the smiling, laughing faces, I felt a sense of gratitude so profound it almost brought me to my knees. This was real. This was earned. Not with money, but with vulnerability, with courage, and with the simple act of choosing to surround myself with people who saw me, not just what I could do for them. A few days after Thanksgiving, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant and familiar. A perfect, looping script. It was from Heather. My first instinct was to throw it away, to not let her poison my newfound peace. But curiosity, or perhaps a lingering shard of hope, made me open it. It wasn't a plea for money or a demand for an apology. It was something else entirely. Michael, the letter began. I don't expect you to read this, and I certainly don't expect you to forgive me. I think I'm writing this for me, not for you. All my life, I was the golden child. I thought it was a privilege, the best role to have. But I realize now it was a prison, a gilded cage. I had to be perfect. I had to succeed. I had to be everything Mom and Dad wanted me to be, because I saw how they treated you, and I was terrified of becoming you. The moment I wasn't perfect, I knew the pedestal would crumble. When you started becoming so successful on your own terms, I was terrified. You didn't need them. You were your own man. I saw how much they depended on your money, and I was afraid that if they didn't have you to lean on, they would turn their full attention, their full weight of expectation onto me, and I would finally disappoint them. So I played along. I took the trips. I encouraged their reliance on you because it kept the pressure off of me. It was selfish and it was weak. What you did, it was like setting off a bomb in our family. And in the wreckage, I've been forced to look at myself and the ugly person I became. I started seeing a therapist last month. It's hard. I don't know what will happen with our family or with me. I just wanted you to know that. I'm sorry for the part one played in your pain. I was a coward. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring slightly. It didn't excuse her actions, not by a long shot. But it explained them. It was a crack in the facade of the perfect, entitled sister I had always known. It was a sign that my standing up for myself hadn't just changed my life. It had sent ripples through theirs, forcing them to confront the toxic roles they had been playing for decades. It wasn't a reconciliation, not even close. But it was a sliver of something unexpected. A complex, painful, human truth. It's been over a year now since that night at Ry4ns144. I still live in the same apartment with the same stunning view of Lake Union, but it feels different. It's no longer a fortress I built to protect myself from the world, but a home I fill with people I love. My business is thriving, but my work is no longer the sole definition of my worth. My identity is not tied to the numbers in a bank account, but to the quality of my relationships. I occasionally hear things about my family through the grapevine from Aunt Catherine. My parents had to sell their oversized house in the suburbs and downsize to a condo. The proceeds barely covered their mountain of credit card debt. Eric apparently has a regular 9-to-5 job in logistics for the first time in his life. I don't know if they are happier or if they've changed in any meaningful way. I've come to accept that their journey is their own, and it no longer has to intersect with mine. The anger is gone, replaced by a kind of distant, quiet sadness for what could have been, and a deep, abiding peace for what is. Sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I take out the letter my grandmother Eleanor wrote me. I've read it so many times the creases in the paper are as soft as cloth. Her words are simple, but they hold the wisdom of a lifetime, a final gift more precious than any trust fund. My dearest Michael, she wrote in her elegant, looping script. If you are reading this, it means you have found your own strength. I always knew it was in you, even when you were a little boy with a kind heart, trying so hard to be seen. Your father and mother, they love you in their own broken way, but they are consumed by the fear of not having enough, of not being enough. They tried to measure your worth in dollars because it is the only language they truly understand. Do not let them teach it to you. Your real value cannot be deposited in a bank or written on a check. It is in your kindness, your resilience, and your quiet, steady heart. That is the inheritance I truly leave you. Build a life that makes you proud. Love with an open heart, but build fences to protect it. You are, and always have been, more than enough. She was right. For so long, I thought my success was the key to earning their love, but I see now that it was just the key to funding their lifestyle. The real key, the one that unlocked my own life, was simply saying no. My greatest return on investment wasn't in the stock market. It was in myself. I had been searching for my family's approval my whole life, but in the end, after all the pain and turmoil, I found something infinitely more valuable, myself. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reached you in some meaningful way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and the expectations of your family? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.